In this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at editing some audio for both one-shot and loop editing. We're working here in Pro Tools, and I've already loaded a file in of some sounds that were recorded, some front door lock sounds in here for this particular file. So let's start out by just taking a listen to that particular file. And here we go. Okay, so in that file we have a lot of great sounds there. Several of them are very short. They'd be great for one-shot sounds. I'm going to go ahead and focus on these longer motor sounds, working with one of these, because these can work as both a one-shot and we can use them as a loop as well. So these are great for illustration. I'm just going to go ahead and take one of these sounds here. Going to go ahead and make a copy of it, place it a little further in the timeline. Several different ways we could accomplish slicing the audio out here, but I'm just going to do it this way for real quick purpose. We want to also make sure that we're going to have good levels to work with. So this looks a little quiet to me. I'm going to make a simple, just go ahead and add some dBs in here, maybe about 9 dB or so, just to turn up the sound a little bit. And we're going to listen, take our grabber tool there. We're just going to listen to the front and back of this. Okay, so much louder. We can zoom in on it a little bit as well, so we can see what's happening. And we could maybe trim this audio file up just a little bit. Get some nice beginnings and ends to it there. Part of the editing process, you're going to want to make sure you have nice levels, good ins and outs on any of the clips you're using. Okay, so that's going to be useful. We can do some further editing in our sampler if we wanted to as well, but that will work. To get this into a sampler, and we're going to be using Kontakt here along with Pro Tools to illustrate how to do the one-shot and the loop editing. So to get this over into Kontakt, we actually need to make this from an edited file into a whole file. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We've got the clip selected already. I'm going to go ahead and just bounce this down. Again, several ways we can do it, but the idea is to separate it from the original audio. So we're going to bounce the mix here. Okay, we're going to rename this one. Let's call it Motor Lock. So we can work with this here. And let's see, we're going to go ahead and put it in the session bounced folder. No need to import after the bounce, because we're going to need to find it in the operating system, the Finder folder, and bring it into Kontakt anyway. It doesn't work in Pro Tools to drag this in from the clips area. So let's just double check everything in there. Let's go ahead and bounce it. We're working offline, so it's going to go pretty quick here. There we go. Okay, and at this particular point, I'm going to double click there, zoom back out. We're not really going to need the first track anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and mute that. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at how to first work with this as a one-shot. So I'm going to go, I have my mixer window over on the side. I have my one-shot track. I'm going to open up Kontakt by clicking on it there. And, usually Kontakt loads with a blank window. I was working at this earlier, so there we go. There's Kontakt with just a blank window there. We want to add a blank instrument. So I'm just going to double-click inside of the area, get a blank instrument here. And to add a sample into this, move it over here a bit, we're going to want to click on the wrench icon. So now we're looking at editing the instrument. And we want to open up the mapping editor. And here's our keyboard layout. We can lay a sample or audio file in here against this so that we can tell it which particular MIDI notes we want to trigger this. To do this again, I'm going to switch very quickly to the Finder. And in the Finder, here's my session folder. I've got that file I just bounced, the motor lock. I'm going to grab that and drop it right in here. I'm looking at the C3 key, so I'm dropping it where I can find it on the keyboard at middle C. Click and go back to Pro Tools. And we'll kind of see how this behaves just on default behavior. I should be able to go to my MIDI keyboard down here, press C3, and get a playback sound. Oh, and I see what I'm missing here. Over in Pro Tools, I need to make sure to record and enable the track we're working on so it passes the MIDI data through. And there we go. And I get that sample playing back when I press the C3 key. Okay, we're using the sampler as an illustration of the MIDI trigger being like a game call or an action that will trigger the particular sound. This is a nice way to get a handle around what's going to happen with your particular sound. And when it's triggered as a one-shot, what will happen if you set it up as a loop, as you'll see us do in a little bit, how that sample will behave as well. So it's just a way to wrap our heads around this concept. Okay, let's take a look at how we edit this a little bit and change some of the behaviors in here. So we're on the mapping editor. To see a little bit more what's going on, we want to click in Kontakt on the wave editor. I'm going to make this screen a little bit bigger so we can see everything all at once. And so now we can see underneath the mapping, we can see the waveform editor. So the way this is working right now, when we press on the key, it's just playing through it. And it's actually playing for only as long as I hold the key. If I press the key briefly and release, it actually stops playing the sound. So it's technically not a one-shot yet. It's just playing as long as I'm holding down a MIDI note. And you'll hear a little bit of a fade out. This is a little bit interesting in Kontakt, but at the bottom of this, we'll need a little knowledge of this as well. So there is by default a little modulation envelope that is on here as well. So when I release the key, you're hearing this bit of a fade out on the bottom. If I change the release all the way back, when I let go of the note, it stops almost immediately. Okay, so this release control down here is going to be important, at least in Kontakt. Not all samplers will be like this, but we need to be aware of that in Kontakt. All right, let's go ahead and set this up as a one-shot to give you a little bit of an idea. And by the way, if you're not too familiar with the sampler yet, there's this little bit of a tracking option on here. Most samplers will do this by default. I'm playing the key C3. So I get one pitch as I go up the keyboard, C sharp, D, D sharp. So wherever I've assigned this, I get a little bit different pitch behavior. I can actually spread this sample out. And this mimics a bit what we're going to be able to do in some game engines or in scripting with actually being able to redefine the pitch of a particular sound as well. So that's basically what the sampler's doing here. I can play it at lower pitches, right, or much higher now. So we can get some interesting manipulations of sound here as well. Okay, but let me narrow this back down again. Bring it back in. And let's go ahead and take a look at exactly setting this up as a one-shot. The great thing about working in the sampler, and to keep in mind in general with your sounds as you're using them, you may not want to use the entire thing. So part of the job of the waveform editor here, I have a start and end point, and I can actually define those. And I can come in and play this a little bit less. Now in here, I need to click on this sample loop at the bottom. And this will actually have several different loops inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and take a moment and go to some of the other ones. Notice I have 8 different loop points. So I'm going to turn off so it's a little bit clearer. Numbers 2 through 8. So that we're just working with number 1. And now when we play this, it's going to actually shorten up the loop a little bit in here. I'm going to change this as a, do the start and the end. Okay, and actually I'm going to turn off that sample loop for a second. We're going to need that when we do the looping one. But for the, just to show the start and end points, I'm going to turn that off temporarily. Okay, so we can actually in here define, if I want to get rid of the little beep in the beginning, there's a little beep at the start of this. I didn't edit that out in Pro Tools when I did the bounce. So maybe in here, I want to start it a little later. Try and get rid of that beep, or at least de-emphasize it a bit more. Okay. Okay. So we can make this as short or long as we want inside of here. Okay, let's go ahead and set this up as a one-shot. So to set this up as a one-shot, I'm going to turn back on the sample looping position again. I have a little pull-down menu right here that allows me to define the way in which this loop point works. And I'm going to go ahead and choose one-shot. Okay. So what should happen on a one-shot, you don't have a camera on my keyboard, but what I'm going to do is press the button and release it. I'm not going to hold it down. And it should play the entire sample just based on that one short trigger. It will play the file from beginning to end. No need to continue the trigger or MIDI note. Okay. So in this particular case, okay, it's actually not doing that particular behavior for me right now. So I'm going to make sure and change some other options inside of here to get the one shot. We need to, again, this is a little particular to Kontakt, but we need to go to the bottom and actually turn off this modulation. We don't want this envelope affecting the playback anymore. We want just the sample loop portion of this. So we're actually going to bypass the modulation up here, or down at the bottom, I should say. And now what happens when I press the key? I just hit it very quickly once, and you'll see once the file starts, it plays all the way to the stop point. Okay, that's a one-shot. Again, a little interesting in Kontakt that we have to make sure we turn off the modulation envelope. If I turn this back on again, that same, I'm not changing anything up here, but that same behavior will change. It basically follows whatever the modulation envelope is telling me. So we could sort of get a one-shot behavior if I increase the release in this to much longer, so that after I let go of the key, it's going to play more towards the end of the file. Okay, you can hear it to start to fade out a little bit, but if I don't set that release long enough, it's never going to make it to the end of the file. So you really don't want that influencing the way it plays back. See if I can set it somewhere in between, give you an idea. So I'm going to hit the key quickly, and we'll see if it, yeah, you can hear the fade out happens too quickly. It can't get to the end. So again, we'll just bypass that on the bottom, so it's not using this envelope. And now we just simply hit the key very quickly once, and it's going to play from beginning to end, no matter what I do there. Okay, so that's going to be a one-shot type of behavior. A lot of our game sounds will be exactly like that. You'll have a short file that you've created there, and it's going to receive a direction from the game engine, and it's going to just play that file from beginning to end. So however you've done fades at the beginning, at the end, that's what you're going to hear each particular time. What's kind of fun about this, I can actually start hitting different MIDI keys in here. Think of this, so you can actually have a range of these sounds. They're all set up as one-shots. And so this is kind of how we can get the same audio file playing back different times. Okay, and the lower the pitch, the slower the playback for that particular one. So those files are going to last a little bit longer on the low end than they will up here on the high end. It's going to be very quick on a high key. Okay, but that was a whole bunch of one-shots coming back from the sampler, all from the same audio file, essentially. All right, let's take a look at the other behavior, setting this up as a loop. To set this up as a loop, we're going to actually want to go back down to the bottom. I'm going to bring the modulation module back into play here. I'm not going to remove the bypass there. And then essentially, we want to, we're going to still use the sample loop. We're going to change from the one-shot setting. We have several different options. We're going to do, the default here starts with the until end. So I'll just start with what you would see first inside of here. But the idea in working with a loop is you're still going to have a start point, and you're going to have an end point of the audio file you want to work with. But somewhere in this section here, we're going to be able to set up loop points so that we can have a start and a finish to a loop. So in here, we have a loop start area. I could also drag that yellow line up there, but I'm just going to pull up on this screen here, and I'm going to go to the loop end. It's going to move over from the right-hand side there, coming on back. And just visually, this is nice. Now you can see that I have a start point, an end point, and somewhere in the middle, I have a loop. So now when I play a key, I'm going to go hit my C3 again. you can see what happens is it starts at the beginning, hits the loop section, and just keeps repeating through the loop. Okay. The tricky thing on working with loops is you're going to hear the start and the end of these loop sections. So this is going to take some experimentation, sometimes zooming in on the file to look at where the crossing points are with your audio. But a lot of times you can just massage this and play around with it till you get a usable result. But you'll get different results in each location. This particular sound, we're going to get a little bit of a rhythmic aspect to it if we're not careful. The shorter the loop, the more of a rhythmic aspect we're going to get. So we probably don't want something like that unless we're trying to create a special effect with it or something else. If we're trying to create a more naturally sustaining sound, more of a motor here or something else, I'm going to probably want to grab a longer section of sound. And it'd be a little tricky in this one, but try to find something. It's going to have a little bit of a rhythm to it, this sound, but maybe with something that has a little bit of a natural rhythm to it like that can be kind of nice. All right, so let's go ahead and do that there because this will be a nice illustration. I'm going to go ahead and move the in point out. Now, we started with the until end, so what's kind of interesting here is that means it's basically going to loop just until the end of the loop. When I release the key, it's going to follow this release envelope, so it's going to take a little bit of time for it to fade out, but it's going to attempt to reach the end of the loop inside of here. So if I press the key very short, it's barely going to make it into the loop. If I go a little bit longer, it'll start looping. And then when I release, it's going to try to get to the end of the loop. If I make that release time a little bit longer, we'll be able to see the actual behavior here. So let me really increase that release time. So now once I release the key, it'll kind of keep going until the end of the loop until that runs out. Okay, so it's really until the end of the envelope. We also have the option, you'll notice all these first ones, it's sort of going back to the beginning of the loop, going to the end of the loop. A lot of times you have the option of that loop section going in forward to backwards order. So in this particular one, I'm going to really reduce this release time here a little bit. More reasonable. In this particular one, it's going to play forward to backward. You should be able to see and hear this easily. Okay, so we get a kind of different effect if we forward and reverse our sample audio during the loop point inside of here. Okay, again, experiment, see which one you like the sound of a little bit better. As I was playing around with these sounds earlier, I found that could actually be kind of nice on this one. Somewhat more realistic on this particular one. And then the other option we have is an until release option. Okay. With the until release option, it'll behave like the other one, except when we release the key, it's going to move beyond the loop and go into this last section until it reaches the endpoint. Okay, and this again, a lot of samplers, when you change it, it's just going to do it automatically. Here in Kontakt, because we have this modulation envelope as part of this, we need to make sure that the release time is long enough that it will actually have a chance to go into the final part of the file and reach the endpoint. So I'm going to increase that right away, so hopefully I get the right behavior. I'm going to go ahead and play the key. And you can see it goes to the end of the file after I release. So one more time, it's going to play inside of the loop as long as I'm holding, and then when I release the key, it goes to the end of the file. Okay. So that's kind of nice, so we can get sustain the middle section and still get an end part of a particular sound if we want it. So this might be kind of nice if we wanted to sustain the sound of the motor a bit and then try to get the first part of the audio file that I had where it does a little bit of break in between there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, and you also have the option with this one of doing the forward and backward during the loop. So I'm going to do that just so you can hear and see this option. And then when I release it, it's moving on to the end of the file. Okay, so that should give you a little bit of a flavor of how we would use these, how we can edit an audio file a bit, put it inside of a sampler, and get some different behaviors, either a one-shot type of behavior or a looping behavior. One final thing I'll throw in here, a neat little trick. Again, we're going to take a look probably at looping a little bit later in how to edit loops inside of our DAW so that we get a little bit smoother transitions on sounds like that, on sounds like this particular one here. But a neat little trick inside of here when you are using a sampler, sometimes if you're not getting a smooth transition, if you double up on the sound, because as we heard earlier, each particular pitch you play this back at plays back at a slightly different speed. So we can actually create loops happening at the same time that have different points at which they're repeating. So that can be kind of nice. Here's an example. Here's that C3 key that we were doing, same pitch you've heard before. Kind of hear the sound. If I play a little bit higher pitch at the same time, maybe like an E flat, there's that one. If I put them together, here's the two together. Okay. Creates a kind of interesting sound. It's a little bit tougher to tell that there's just you don't hear a single loop going on anymore. So rhythmically, it's a little bit more interesting. You'll also, if you ever have your DAW open, when you're looking at your sampler, you can see that that loop looks a little bit funny when you have multiple notes. So if you see that going on, you know you're hitting multiple notes. You can even do something like this. You're going to hear sometimes maybe the lower pitch trailing out a little bit at the end, but kind of fun. All right, hope you've enjoyed this look a little bit at one-shot and loop editing, and we'll see you in a later video.